the textual criticism side is super interesting to me, where we
Mhm.
have all these fragments, and you talked about P50 or was it P56, the first fragment found
Yeah.
of the Gospel of John, actually,
Mhm.
right? So it's like, it's super interesting stuff. But how do you square when you give me a number, 97% accuracy? To me, it's the same thing as saying 3% inaccurate. How can something that is 3% inaccurate be called accurate?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair question, right? And I think that you would have to make that same argument objectively across any piece of historical writing. Which I don't know that most historical pieces that are counted as being accurate are put under the same scrutiny, but I guess they don't have the same implications
Yeah,
that
there's a standard here,
yeah,
like that.
fair,
Yeah,
fair. And I think it's important to go back to the words of the statistic, which again, not a historian, not a
Mhm.
scholar, but believed to have greater than 97% accuracy of what the original said.
Of what they said. So, and we believe we have 97% because we can't know,
From the fragments that we
right?
have, because we
Because we
don't
have
have
no
the original
originals.
manuscripts. Like the
Zero.
oldest one we have is 50, give or take, years away from when it is believed that the oldest were written.
Right.
But because of the different amounts of the 5,000 or so pieces, we believe that the people that are way smarter than you or I and commit their whole lives to doing it
Yeah.
believe that they have with 97% accuracy around what the originals actually said,
So then
down to a word.
what do you do with the 3%? That's not
Do you
accurate.
have to do anything to it? I mean,
Well,
it
I
doesn't
guess
mean that it's not. It just means that we believe that we have a 97% spot on to what the original, and it doesn't
I think
say
the
that
statement
3% is inaccurate. It just says that from what we can verify from the length of time that has passed,
Yeah.
we believe that we have 97% accuracy on what the original text said.
So my take is that if we believe that we have 97%, then we also believe that we have 3% that's not accurate, or we don't know what it actually says, which is problematic to me. But like what we're talking about here is that these are the Greek manuscripts. We have like 5,800 of them.
Yeah.
Right. And there's some interesting data points around it that I think people don't often know, because when we talk about accuracy here and we talk about being in the 90%, like, that sounds really good, but it can also sound bad, because if I was to tell you that these Greek manuscripts that we have, I think it's 5,800 of them, there are a lot of variance between these manuscripts. Like, we have a hard time piecing it together because there's only, I think the word count in the New Testament in Greek, it's like 138 or 136,000. I think it's 138,000. I'll stick to that. 138,000 words in the New Testament. The variance we have between the 5,800 manuscripts is more than the words that we have. We have over 300,000 variations within these manuscripts. Now, it is true to say that most of those variations are spelling, the order of words, and it's true to say that 99% of them do not change the meaning of the text. That's true to say. But 1% of them do change the meaning of the text. And when we have 1% across 300,000, that is 3,000 variants that change the meaning of the text. And that is significant. It sounds different when I say 3,000 versus 300,000 versus when we say 99% of it is the same, or it doesn't actually change the meaning.
Yeah.
And this is where we get the stuff like the ending of Mark that is abruptly cut off at verse 8 and added later. The verses in first John about the Trinity that we know are added later. Stories in the Bible that we see moved around to different places and different times in the Gospels. The woman that commits adultery, right? That is a story that scholars know. It's been found all over the New Testament, in different books actually, right? They know that that's not part of the original. So when you have 3,000 variations, it calls into question. It calls into question this text overall. I think it's an important point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, right? And again, I think it comes back to our opening arguments of, you're potentially forming your whole life trajectory off of whether or not you believe this text. Like what you do for work, who you are as a person, who you marry. Like you're shaping your life off of this text. And I think that the natural analytical human being wants to know with 100% certainty that I can rely on every single word that is written here to shape my life. And that's not an unrealistic desire. And I think it comes back to, like, if you're believing in divine authorship or divine inspiration, and but I would pull us back from, because I don't know that we can ever get there. Like, I don't know that, like, we won't probably ever have the original manuscripts, and so there's always going to be room for know this, know that, and we'll always be kind of, there'll always be something to debate about, which is good for us, right? We get to have more debates. But
if we can't know that, can we call them accurate and reliable?
Well, again, I think what are the most important things to rely on to shape your life as to whether this is true or not. Whether Jesus, like, faced the east, took 5 steps and sneezed, or if he faced the west, took 3 steps and then coughed, is not life or death, hell or heaven, but that Jesus lived, the claims that he made about himself, that he was born of a virgin because, the sin nature being passed through the Father, if you believe, the text as it is written and stuff. And so Jesus needing to not have an earthly father in order to not have the sin nature that we typically would have as human beings that we're born into. And then his death, the crucifixion, and ultimately the resurrection. And then, so I think that is what you're trying to say. Can we, with good reason, disprove it or show that that's inaccurate or unreliable? I think all the other historicity of the text is largely just proof and confidence that, when we see the pools at Siloam, when we see the pools at Bethesda, when we get confirmation in Caiaphas's tomb, it's more affirmation that the core tenets that we're basing our life around as a Christian are in fact reliable and accurate.
I have to disagree. Because, like, the location of a tomb or things that are written in the Bible, I can't figure out how that proves anything about the Bible. What it tells me is this book was written by someone who was either familiar with that location or knew somebody who was familiar with that location. That's all it tells me. But if we do an archaeological dig and we dig up something, and it's like, oh, yeah, geez, that was mentioned in the Bible, therefore the Bible is true. No, that's not the conclusion we come to. We can say, yeah, that one specific thing the Bible got right, but it doesn't really tell us anything else.
It's tiny little specks. We'll call them breadcrumbs, in my opinion, right? It's like we are putting together breadcrumbs of history and racing against time, because time tends to erode preservable artifacts and distort preservable artifacts. So we are racing against time to piece together breadcrumbs of what can we possibly know about the reality of why we're here, and is the Bible reliable? And so does the discovery of an archaeological site prove that the Bible is true? No. But it proves that the authors were writing about a real place that people visited. And so the more pieces that you can find of historical sites or artifacts or people that lived, when we find Josephus's writings about the confirming the life, baptism, and crucifixion of Jesus, these are all breadcrumbs that a person truly seeking answers in faith can use to say, hey, this doesn't confirm my faith, but it also means that the Bible just wasn't making things up. So that's where I think it becomes usable.
Let me show you how easy it is to create breadcrumbs, right? I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, right? If I made a claim to you that I am the president of the United States, big claim, right? And then I went on to corroborate that claim by giving you good descriptions of the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial, the Museum of Natural History, told you about some great restaurants and bars that are on K Street in DC. That does nothing to give you any information about the big claim that I made, which is I said I was the president of the United States. So I can give you a bunch of breadcrumbs and details, but they're irrelevant to the actual claim.
Yeah, but you also didn't give me details of Narnia. So you're more credible. You're more credible by giving me at least some pointing to history. It doesn't
But credible to what?
automatically.
Credible to the fact that I know Washington, D.C.
Sure.
But that says nothing about the claim that I'm making that also has nothing to do with Washington, D.C., right? The claim that you're making there is that Jesus is saying that he's God, right?
Yeah.
I can't point to the Pool of Siloam and say that that helps me with actually understanding
No,
or corroborating that.
You only use those examples to say that, I mean, they call it the aim theory, right? Were the authors of the gospel able to write history about Jesus?
Mhm.
Yes. If they followed him and walked most of their adult life with him until he was crucified, yes, they were able. Did they intend to write history? More debate there, right? Because that's where you start to get into the details and how it was written and stuff like that. And that's where you can start to say, well, they're referencing real places and real people and real events that could have easily been refuted by the people of the day that were living this out. So when you have references to historical places rather than Narnia or whatever, then you can infer that maybe their intent was to, in fact, write history. And then did they actually write history? Like, was that what they were meaning to do? Were they meaning to write history? And so I think that's the argument that can be made that we're not going to solve on this debate. But I don't think that the existence of archaeological sites points to Jesus was the Son of God and he resurrected.
Yeah.
But we're talking about where did these gospels come from? Are they accurate and reliable?
Yeah.
And if there were places written in here and things that were not real or that were just way out of alignment with independent history, then we wouldn't really be having this conversation because like that becomes more mythology. But the more things that you prove about the time period and what was there and what people were interacting with, the more that it points towards historicity, was all I was saying.
Okay. I think we could agree on this point, that if either one of us lived in Galilee at that time, we could have also written just as plausible of a story that included names, locations, like, because I've also heard people say like, oh, the names in the Bible, they're accurate for that time period and that location. It's like, okay, who cares? Like, if I lived during that time, I could have told you names from that time too. I could tell you locations from that time. I don't think it helps us with the story, but I also will concede that I stole the question there, so I'll let it go back to you.
No, you're good. You're good.